Welcome to This Week in Royal History, where we delve into the captivating stories of royals from around the world and across the centuries. Join us as we explore their profound impact on history and society through their triumphs and tragedies. These royals have shaped the world we live in today, leaving behind legacies that continue to inspire and intrigue us. So sit back, relax, and journey with us through time as we uncover the enchanting and sometimes tragic lives of the royals who have captured our hearts and imaginations throughout the ages. On the 1st of September, 1532, Windsor Castle buzzed with anticipation as Henry VIII did something truly unprecedented. He created the title of Marquess of Pembroke for his beloved Anne Boleyn. This was no ordinary promotion. It was a bold declaration of Anne's future as Queen of England. With this title, Anne, now one of the wealthiest and most powerful women at court, held the title that, until then, had only ever belonged to men. And who could be trusted to bestow such an honor? Well, none other than Henry himself, taking center stage in a grand ceremony. But as swiftly as this title elevated Anne to the pinnacle of power, it vanished just as quickly with her tragic downfall in 1536. Princess Anna Sophie of Denmark was born on the 1st of September, 1647. Her father, Frederick of Denmark, ascended to the throne as King Frederick III of Denmark and Norway in 1648, when she was just over a year old. Growing up as a princess, Anna Sophie was not only well educated, but also a true polyglot, mastering at least 6 languages. In October 1666, Anna Sophie married John George of Saxony, a union that, unfortunately, didn't bring much joy. Despite the grand titles and the birth of 2 sons, their marriage was far from happy. When her husband became Elector of Saxony in 1680, Anna Sophie took on the title of Electress. But in 1691, John George died, followed by the tragic loss of their eldest son in 1694. Her surviving son, Frederick Augustus, rose to prominence, becoming Elector of Saxony in 1694, and then King of Poland in 1697. As her story wound down, Anna Sophie found solace with her sister at Castle Lichtenberg, where she lived out her final years. She passed away on the 1st of July, 1717, in Preton, and was laid to rest alongside her husband at Freiburg Cathedral, marking the end of a life that, while marked by titles and power, was also shadowed by personal sorrow. On the 3rd of September, 1189, Westminster Abbey was the scene of a grand spectacle as Richard I, famously known as Richard the Lionheart, ascended to the English throne. But beneath the splendor, darkness stirred. Rumors spread like wildfire among the Christian crowd that Richard had sanctioned attacks on the Jewish community in London. Chaos erupted. Jewish homes were set ablaze. Terrified families sought refuge in the Tower of London, and some were brutally forced into conversion. However, Richard's wrath soon fell upon the perpetrators. Determined to restore order, he swiftly ordered the punishment and execution of those guilty of murder and arson, sending a clear message that such violence would not be tolerated under his reign. Eleanor of Portugal was born on the 18th of September, 1434, in sun-soaked Portugal. She was the eldest surviving daughter of Edward, King of Portugal, and Eleanor of Aragon, and was one of 9 siblings. Tragedy struck early when her father passed away just before her 4th birthday, leaving her brother to become Alfonso V of Portugal. The family drama intensified when her mother was exiled by a power-hungry uncle vying for the regency, leaving young Eleanor behind. In March 1452, Eleanor's life took a dramatic turn when she married Frederick III in a grand ceremony in Rome. Just 3 days later, they were crowned Holy Roman Emperor and Empress, sharing the weight of a vast empire. Despite the grandeur, their marriage was far from a fairy tale. Their clashing personalities led to an unhappy union. They had 5 children together, though 2 sons and a daughter died young, leaving them a son who became Holy Roman Emperor and a daughter who became Duchess of Bavaria. Eleanor died on the 3rd of September, 1467, at the age of 32. She was laid to rest in Vienna, her legacy intertwined with the rise and fall of empires. Joan of England's life began in October 1165 in Anjou, born into the legendary lineage of Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine. When she was 11 years old, in February 1177, she became Queen of Sicily, marrying William II in a lavish ceremony in Palermo. But despite the titles and the crown, their marriage remained childless, and fate dealt a cruel hand when William died in 1189. Jane's world was thrown into chaos as Sicily was seized by William's illegitimate cousin, who stripped her of her lands and left her stranded. Enter her heroic brother, Richard the Lionheart. In 1190, Richard arrived in Italy, determined to rescue his sister. After a winter spent planning her escape, they returned to England together. But Joan's story didn't end there. In 1196, she married Raymond VI, Count of Toulouse, and together they had 1 son who died in infancy. Tragically, Joan's life was cut short on the 4th of September, 1199, when she died in childbirth. In her final moments, she made a poignant request to be veiled as a nun. Her son, born by cesarean section after her death, lived just long enough to be baptized and named Richard. Future Alexander III's story began on the 4th of September, 1241, the only son of Alexander II of Scotland and Marie de Courcy. By the tender age of 7, he was thrust into the throne as King of Scotland, a crown too big for his young head, but one he would grow into. At just 10 years old, Alexander was already playing the part of a king, marrying 11-year-old Margaret of England, the daughter of Henry III. Not too surprisingly, it took 10 years of marriage before their first child, Margaret, arrived in 1261, and together they had 3 children, including Alexander and David. But tragedy struck in 1275 when Margaret passed away, leaving Alexander to navigate the challenges of kingship alone. In 1281, their daughter Margaret wed King Eric II of Norway, a strategic move to smooth tensions between their kingdoms. Their union produced a daughter, yet another Margaret, known as the Maid of Norway, before tragedy struck again with Margaret's death in 1283. Heartbreak continued as Alexander's son, Prince Alexander, died in 1284, prompting the king to name his granddaughter, the Maid of Norway, as his heir. His other son, David, had already died in 1281. In the last attempt to secure his dynasty, Alexander married Yolande of Dreux in 1285, hoping for a male heir. But fate had other plans. On the 19th of March, 1286, at 44 years old, Alexander met an untimely death, falling from his horse while riding in the dark to visit the Queen at Kinghorn in Fife. It was her birthday the next day. Alexander left his kingdom to his 3-year-old granddaughter, Margaret. Sadly, the Maid of Norway never set foot in Scotland, dying in 1290 and plunging the kingdom into a succession crisis that would change Scotland's history forever. The future Louis VIII of France entered the world on the 5th of September, 1187, in the heart of Paris, born to Philip II of France and Isabella of Hainault. As their only surviving son, Louis carried the weight of a kingdom's expectations on his young shoulders. At just 12 years old, in May 1200, he married his equally young bride, Blanche of Castile. Together, they would bring 13 children into the world between 1205 and 1227, though not all would survive the harsh realities of medieval life. Louis quickly proved himself more than just a royal figurehead. In 1214, he fought alongside his father to drive back King Joan of England's forces from Normandy. Then, in 1216, fate threw him a tantalizing opportunity. Rebel barons in England, fed up with King John, offered Louis the English crown. With boldness befitting a future king, Louis marched into London, unopposed, and was proclaimed King Louis I of England at Old St. Paul's Cathedral. But the crown was never truly his. When King John died in October 1216, the fickle barons switched allegiance to John's young son, Henry III, forcing Louis to strike a peace deal. In exchange for a hefty payment, he agreed to abandon his claim to the English throne and vowed never to attack England again. Louis's destiny was not to rule England, but France. In July 1223, following his father's death, Louis VIII ascended to the French throne and was crowned in August in Reims. His reign was brief but bold, marked by a crusade to bring the rebellious south of France under royal control. But while returning to Paris, Louis fell gravely ill with dysentery. On the 8th of November, 1226, in Auvergne, the king's journey came to an end. He was laid to rest at the Basilica of St. Denis, leaving his 12-year-old son, Louis IX, to inherit the throne. Isabel Neville was born on the 5th of September, 1451, Isabel Neville was born on the 5th of September, 1451, into one of the most powerful families in England, at the legendary Warwick Castle. Her father, Richard Neville, the 16th Earl of Warwick, was none other than the Kingmaker, a key figure in the Wars of the Roses, who played a pivotal role in placing Edward IV on the English throne. Isabel's life was steeped in the drama and intrigue of this turbulent era. In July 1469, Isabel married George, 1st Duke of Clarence, in a ceremony in Calais. But George was no ordinary noble. He was the brother of both Edward IV and the future Richard III. But marriage to the king's brother was no fairy tale. Shortly after their wedding, Isabel found herself caught in the dangerous Game of Thrones. Her husband and father had switched sides, joining the Lancastrians, enemies of the Yorkist faction they once supported. They even allied with the formidable Margaret of Anjou. Despite the chaos of her world, Isabel and George had 4 children, though only 2, Margaret and Edward, survived to adulthood. Isabel died on the 22nd of December, 1476, just 2 months after the birth of her second son. Her death marked the beginning of a dark chapter for her family. In 1478, her husband George was executed by his own brother Edward IV, and years later, her son Edward met a similar fate, executed in 1499 by Henry VII. The story didn't end there. Her daughter, Margaret Pole, was executed by Henry VIII in 1541, sealing the tragic legacy of Isabel Neville, a woman whose life was woven into the very fabric of England's most tumultuous times. John of Cleves was born on the 16th of February, 1419, to Adolf I, Duke of Cleves, and Mary of Burgundy, the eldest son and third child in a family destined for greatness. Raised in the glittering Burgundian court of his uncle Philip the Good, John was groomed for power from an early age. In 1448, he stepped into his role as Duke of Cleves, a title that carried both prestige and responsibility. By 1461, he added another feather to his cap, becoming Count of Mark. In April 1455, he married Elizabeth of Neville, and together they had 6 children, though not all would survive to adulthood, as was the harsh reality of the times. John was not content to simply rule his own lands. In 1473, he played a key role in helping his cousin, Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, seize control of the Duchy of Guelders, expanding his influence even further. But after a life marked by power and ambition, John's story came to an end on the 5th of September, 1481, at the age of 62. And here's an intriguing Tudor twist to the story. John of Cleves is none other than the great-grandfather of Anne of Cleves, the 4th wife of Henry VIII and Queen Consort of England. His legacy, though largely behind the scenes, set the stage for one of history's most famous marital dramas. On the 7th of September, 1533, England welcomed a fiery redhead who would change the course of history, future Elizabeth I. Born to King Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's arrival was a royal spectacle. The kingdom had eagerly awaited a male heir, but instead they got a princess with a destiny far greater than anyone could have imagined. Amidst the political intrigue and family drama of her father's tumultuous reign, Elizabeth's birth marked the beginning of an extraordinary life. She would rise above it all to become the iconic Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, Gloriana, who led England through its golden age and left an enduring legacy. Joan of England, not to be confused with the previously mentioned daughter of Henry II of England, was born on the 5th of July, 1321, to Edward II of England and Isabella of France. Known as Joan of the Tower, thanks to her birthplace in the Tower of London, she was destined for a life entwined with the politics and power struggles of medieval England. At just 7 years old, Joan was married off to David of Scotland, a union meant to forge an alliance between England and Scotland. David was only 4 at the time, and in 1329 he became King David II of Scotland. But life as queen was anything but a fairy tale for Joan. In 1333, after her brother Edward III defeated their forces at the Battle of Halidon Hill, Joan and David were forced to flee to France, leaving behind the troubled Scottish throne. In 1341, they returned to Scotland, but their reunion was short-lived. David was captured by the English in 1346 and imprisoned in the very Tower of London where Joan had been born. For 11 long years, David remained a prisoner, while Joan chose to stay in England, even after his release in 1357. Joan's life came to a quiet end on the 7th of September, 1362, at the age of 41 in England. She was laid to rest at Christ Church Greyfriars, but her tomb was lost during the Blitz, leaving little trace of the queen who was once called Joan of the Tower. Joanna of Austria was born on the 24th of June, 1535, in the heart of Madrid to none other than Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, and Isabella of Portugal. Growing up in the glittering courts of Spain, she shared her childhood with her brother, future Philip II of Spain, and her sister Maria, who would one day become the Holy Roman Empress. At just 17, Joanna was thrust into the world of royal alliances, marrying her double first cousin, 15-year-old Prince Juan Manuel of Portugal, in January 1552, by proxy, no less. She finally arrived in Portugal that November, only to have her world turned upside down just 2 months later. In January 1554, tragedy struck when Juan Manuel succumbed to tuberculosis, leaving Joanna a widow before she even had a chance to settle into her new life. But amidst the sorrow, there was a glimmer of hope. Less than a month after her husband's death, she gave birth to their son, Sebastian, the new Prince of Portugal and heir apparent. Duty called Joanna back to Spain shortly after her son's birth. Her brother Philip was off to England to marry Queen Mary I, and Joanna needed to act as regent in his absence. She left young Sebastian in the care of her mother-in-law, Catherine of Austria, Queen of Portugal, and though she would never return to Portugal or see her son again, Joanna maintained a bond with him through letters. Joanna's life, filled with royal responsibilities and personal sacrifices, came to an end on the 7th of September, 1573, at the age of 38. Her son, Sebastian, ascended to the throne as King Sebastian I of Portugal in 1557, only to meet a mysterious fate in 1578 when he vanished in battle, leaving behind a legacy shrouded in legend.